Welcome, folks, to this final installment of Civil Rights, Part 4 of 4. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. So, we are going to take a deep dive into some additional rights, and we're going to do a nice little wrap up sort of at the end. We're going to take a look at the U.S. Census Bureau to really kind of get a sense of where America's cultural, racial, and ethnic background is going. So, without further ado, here we go. So let's start with immigration, Hispanics, and civil rights. So one of the things that gets lost when we discuss the civil rights movement is that a lot of the discrimination faced by African Americans, not all of it, obviously, but a lot of it also applies to Hispanics as well. We're going to talk about something called affirmative action in a little bit. And affirmative action is a policy that protects or does its best to protect, offers government sanctioned protection and certain rights to Hispanics, blacks, and women. Notably, Asians and Jews are left out of that, although they are historic minorities as well. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So, immigration rates today are high. They're the highest they've been since the early 20th century. We had a lot of Eastern Europeans in particular emigrating to the United States and some from Western Europe as well. Most of the modern immigrants that come to the United States are coming from Latin America or Asia. So the common, I would say, white anti-immigrant refrain is that unfortunately, a certain former president referred to all Latin American immigrants as Mexicans, right? And this prevailing view that the worst immigrants that we've ever gotten in our lives are in our history are coming from Latin America, right? They're not sending their best. This is what a former president said, and quite frankly, it's disgraceful. I mean, I have other words for it, but not appropriate for the video lesson environment. But so we're going to talk about this. There's these crazy ideas that are floating about that specifically target Hispanics and Spanish-speaking folks in the United States. Those who are, in fact, citizens are suspected of not being such, or of not being authorized to be in the country just simply because they speak Spanish and are subjected to illegal search and seizures and getting pulled over and things like that. So we're going to talk about that as well. By 2050, according to some projections, minority groups collectively will constitute the majority of Americans. So we will have a minority-majority country. So that means all non-white folks total will outnumber white folks. Okay. Now, for some white people, not this one, but for some white people, this is causing an absolute panic that white people are getting replaced. This ridiculous conspiracy theory. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Let me show you some data. This data comes from some years ago. It's from the U.S. Census, but these are projections, right? So this was done before 2010. So it says here data for 2010, 2030, and 2050 are projections. So this is the projection for what they think the country is going to look like. Obviously, we're way past 2010, right? And I'm going to show you some updated data in just a second. And so you can see that in 2000, white population is 69%. By 2010, the estimation it'll be 64. By 2030, which currently is only 7 years from now, it'll be 55. And then by 2050, it'll be 46. And that's where you have the majority-minority country there, right? Where Hispanics will be by far the dominant non-white group, but still less than whites. So let me exit out of this and go to my window here. And this is the U.S. Census website, right? This has, and it tells you this is an official website of the United States government. It even gives you a breakdown of how you know that it is, because there are a lot of sites that masquerade as a legitimate site. And so this is a good tool. You should check this out. You can Google this yourself. This is what I Googled. And if you go to all, right, and you can find these sites, right? So here's the site. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. It gives you a breakdown, and you guys can read that on your own. And then we're going to scroll all the way down and look at some data, right? So here's the thing. In the 2010 census, the expectation, or rather, let's see if it matches the expectation, right? This was the actual census, right? This is the actual data. So percentage of distribution of Hispanic or Latino population. non-Hispanic or Latino. So this includes everybody who isn't Hispanic or Latino versus Hispanic or Latino. And so between in those 10 years, it only went up a little over 2%. So let's go back to this PowerPoint and see. Let's see what this actually shows, right? So from 2010, so here it says 16%, the projection is here, right? So I don't know that that data necessarily matches up. So let's go back. Let's go back to the site. So this is a big picture breakdown between 2010 and 2030, right? So let's see if the projection matches. So here's the 2010 census. All right, so race alone, race in combination, race alone or in combination. So race alone, that's where the white population was in 2010, over 70%. Okay, African American population. Okay, so data doesn't quite match up now, does it? And then here's the 2020 census. So you do see there's been a decrease, right? And then here's another breakdown. So this notion of replacement theory is vastly overestimated. It is a conspiracy theory perpetuated by white supremacists, and it is patently inaccurate. And I invite you to review this data. The data is here and it is clear. Okay, the folks that are peddling these conspiracy theories are inherently racist. They are white supremacists, and they have no business attempting to make policy in this country. So I wanted to show that to you, and you can look at the data for yourself. It has no basis in reality. There's a close up of that graph. So illegal immigration, this is the term used by folks usually on the ideological right. The term used on the left is undocumented immigration. It's considered more human friendly. To use the term undocumented, I include this here and make that distinction simply to let you know there is an ideological divide, not only on the policies for immigration, but on even the terminology that should be used. So most folks who are entering are looking for work. They're looking for work. It's very simple. Now, there are folks who are using the border as a means to move drugs, right, and human trafficking and drug trafficking, right. But if we had better policies that effectively offered options for those who were simply looking for work, then we could focus our attention on actually dealing with the folks who are dealing in nefarious activities, right? So there's a big debate surrounding this. We're going to go into detail about this in class. We're going to talk about this issue. It's at the forefront of many Americans' minds. Again, with our most recent president, not Joe Biden is the current president, but with the previous president, Donald Trump, this was a major, major issue. He spoke at length about this issue, and a lot of his voters feel very strongly about this issue. They love the idea of things like the wall on the southern border, and among other policies. There's this also issue of bilingual education, right? Should we be teaching students in their native language, in both their native language and English, and how do we accomplish that? Bilingual education has largely gone out of favor in the United States. There are certain states like Arizona or Texas that it would be more of a factor. A city like New York City, for example, where I am, you have so many different languages that trying to educate all students in a bilingual setting it would be a complicated policy to enact. With so much diversity and so many children, immigrant children from a variety of different backgrounds. Although there are schools in New York City that do offer this, but there's been mixed results. There are subsequent studies that say some of the same. It works. It doesn't work. It's tough to say. There's a conflicting data on each side. But public opinion, as you know, no surprise here. Well, actually, there is a little bit of a surprise. You'd think that white people would oppose it, but actually, most white people favor it, which is interesting. But Hispanics favor it by a large margin. But overall, when this particular poll was taken, it's favored. So it's not a question of public opinion. It's more a question of efficacy of the policy. And this is another piece of data still another study. Again, this is old. This is from '98. You can find more updated studies if you do research. So, affirmative action. Now, I talked about this very briefly, introduced this topic, but here it is. You need to write this down. You need to memorize this definition. You need to know what it is. We're going to spend a lot of time on this in class because there are cases going to the Supreme Court right now that could effectively undo affirmative action. So it's something that we need to pay attention to because it benefits quite a few folks. There's a program that requires proactive steps to erase differences between women and men, between minority groups and non-minority groups in labor markets or education outcomes. So this is not the government sitting back and just refereeing and stepping in if somebody's actively doing something wrong. This requires the government to be proactive, to take steps if there is a difference in the performance or the hiring or college acceptance between a discriminated group and a non-discriminated group. The government must actively pass laws and regulations and take steps to remove these discrepancies, remove these differences. So there is a lot of controversy surrounding this policy. Now, I want you to be aware, anti-discrimination laws are not affirmative action. Anti-discrimination laws say it is illegal, for example, not to hire somebody because they're black or they're Hispanic or they're gay. Okay, that is not the same thing as affirmative action. Affirmative action, the government steps in with anti-discrimination laws to stop or deal with the discrimination that's already taken place. Affirmative action assumes there are discriminatory practices and has to take active steps to dissemble them. So these are two different policies here, and I want you to be aware they are not the same thing. So some key Supreme Court cases for affirmative action. We're going to talk about these. By far, the most important ones are the Regents of the University of California v. Bakke, usually known as Bakke for short, and then Grutter and Gratz v. Bollinger. Okay, both of them in 2003. They were kind of a combined, these cases were combined in one decision. So those two cases you need to pay particular attention to. They will be on the AP exam. Okay, need to know those. Need to know those. The other ones obviously are helpful, and we'll talk about those as well, but I really want you to understand those. So you've got to write all of this down, but you need to memorize Bakke and Bollinger, both Bollingers, okay? So quotas are not required by affirmative action, but were an acceptable way to fulfill the requirements to a point. So the Supreme Court ruled that race can be used as a factor, but if it's weighted too much, then it's unconstitutional. This idea was decided in a Supreme Court case we're going to discuss in class. So quotas technically aren't really in existence per se, not literally. There's not like a number of black people or women that or Hispanics that colleges, for example, and universities have to accept into their programs. But race can be used as a factor, and they can determine. Each university and college can determine how much weight to give it. So support for affirmative action programs among whites. So liberals support it, moderates are split, and conservatives are vehemently against it. They believe affirmative action is inherently racist because it assumes that non-white people can't do things themselves. It requires the government to help because they can't do it themselves. So conservatives will argue it creates a victim culture. Now, some of those conservatives may, in fact, or self-proclaimed conservatives may, in fact, believe that. Many of them are oppose this for racist reasons. Not all, but some. We'll get into the variety of these ridiculous arguments and talk about them when we discuss this in detail in class. We're going to have a whole Socratic seminar on civil rights. So here's some data on colleges, right? Fall freshman enrollment by race ethnicity before and after ending race-based affirmative action, right? So you can see this goes all the way up to 2010. Obviously, some years have passed since then. We'll explore more updated data in class, but you can pause the video and take a look at the data for yourself. Another graph. This is from 2014. Okay, so now on to LGBTQIA rights. Okay, so gay activists do play a role in both major parties. Although the log cabin Republicans are sort of like it's almost like an oxymoron. A gay Republican. This is like the prevailing viewpoints of many within the community. But there are gay Republicans, and they are known as log cabin Republicans. Um, Gays and lesbians in the military, and also trans folks, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was ended in 2011. So you can no longer be dishonorably discharged for being a member of this community. But up until 2011, it would count as a felony. You were dishonorably discharged if you were found out. If they found you out, and that carries the weight of a felony. So good luck getting a job after that. Same-sex marriages are controversial, right? So the issue, which has now been settled, it's settled in 2015, and we'll talk about that in much more detail in class. But Obergefell was a decision, a Supreme Court decision, that legalized gay marriage nationwide. This happened in 2015. But before that, only 35 states allowed same-sex marriage, and many states banned it straight up. I was living in Florida at the time when it was banned before 2015. Child custody and adoption is also an issue. So even if you're partnered, retaining custody if a partner dies, or trying to figure out custody battles in the case of divorce or separation, was very, very complicated for LGBT families. So where is gay marriage legal? Again, this is before 2015, okay? So all the states where it's banned outright, this is before 2015, like I said, banned, but it's currently being challenged in court, or at the time of this graph, that's all the pink, right? So banned, struck down, but they're appealing, and then where it's straight up legal, right? So pretty much most of the Northeast has it fully legal, and then the Pacific Northwest has it fully legal. But a lot of states here are like, no, 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 we don't want that. So what I find interesting about gay marriage is this comes back to a question of civil liberties as well, which we discussed or will discuss in those video lessons. But just share some graphics with you, like this idea of, traditional marriage must be maintained. It's a violation of my personal rights if somebody else gets married in a way I don't like. Well, if you really want to go that far, the fact that you can't sell your daughter for 3 goats and a cow means we've already redefined marriage. I mean, back in the day, all marriages were arranged. They were political. And military alliances, women had no say in it. It was the fathers that, even a lot of times, the son didn't have the husband-to-be didn't have a say in it. It was the two fathers of the would-be married couple that organized this. The couple had nothing to say about it, and then, I just had to toss this in there because it's funny. It's very dear to me, the issue of gay marriage, or as I like to call it, marriage. Because I had lunch this afternoon. Not gay lunch. I parked my car. I didn't gay park it, right? It's if you don't like it, don't get one. You know what I'm saying? Like, just don't have marriage. Just don't have it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to approve of it. You just leave me alone. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, Okay, so transgender rights. They're practically non-existent. And not only are they non-existent, but currently right now, they are actively being fought against. Many, many states are passing laws actively going after trans people. So for lesbians and gays, it's bad enough, but it's even far worse for trans people. And let me make people aware of something, a bit of LGBTQIA history. It was Black trans women that started Stonewall, that started the LGBT, civil rights movement. Black trans women. Okay, that should be noted. Everyone should be aware of this. We'll talk about that more in class. So here's a graphic. This is more updated, just to give you a sense of where policy is going. So here's the big graphic, but I'm going to go break it up into little sections here for you. So here's the gender identity policy by state. So negative equality states. These are 23 states. They're where 35% of the LGBT population is, and this represents that. And then high equality states. This represents 12 states, 39% of the population, right? And then you also have low equality. You have negative, low, medium, and high. So I'm currently in New York, and I'm in high. I was living in Florida a few years ago. Let's see where Florida shows up. If it's in here, do we see Florida? I don't even see it. Well, anyway, you guys can take a look at that yourselves. And here's the next one, overall policy tally by state. So Florida has low equity here. New York has high equity. Georgia, not looking too good. That's the overall tally for everybody. Then we have sexual orientation policies. So medium equality for sexual orientation. No negative equality. currently. So that's a help. Um, but when we look at gender identity, 23 states. Look at that. So sexual orientation has largely moved. The majority of the population is largely like over it. Don't care. We're cool with equality, right? But not gender identity. Gender identity is that sort of next thing to tackle. 23 states are actively going after trans people. So this is important to know. Now, that represents the end of our unit, folks. So we will talk about all these issues in class in more detail. I invite your questions. I invite your comments and opinions. I hope you guys learned what you needed to, and I will see you in the next unit.